Jeremy Clarkson did not leave 200 acres empty because he lost interest in farming. He left them empty because, on the numbers, growing wheat on them did not make sense. And that is the part nobody in the tabloid coverage really sat with. Because once you strip away the celebrity headline, what you are left with is a much colder question. When British wheat prices rise to levels we have not seen in years, why can a farmer still decide that doing nothing is the better business move? Clarkson said in his Sun column that 200 acres at Diddley Squat were left uncropped this year. Not because of a storm, not because of disease, not because someone at the council decided to make life difficult. He said they already knew planting wheat or barley there would lose money. That word matters. Knew. Not guessed. Not feared. Knew. Someone looked at the land, ran the figures, and decided that the safest financial move was to plant nothing at all. Most people heard a celebrity farming anecdote. What Clarkson actually described was a spreadsheet telling the truth. And if you have ever opened your own bills and felt that quiet, sinking moment where the math has already won, you understand why this hit a nerve. Here is where the story gets interesting. The easy explanation would be a weak grain market, with wheat prices collapsing and farmers getting squeezed from every side. That would be neat. It would be tidy. It would also be wrong. The week before Clarkson's column ran, UK wheat futures were not in the gutter. They were strong. The AHDB Arable Market Report for the week, ending 24th July 2026, showed November 2026 UK feed wheat futures closing at $199.75 a ton, up sharply on the week, and briefly touching above the $200 mark during that same stretch. So let's say that plainly. British wheat was expensive, and still, 200 acres were left empty. That is not a bad market. That is a broken equation. And that is exactly why farmers keep looking at these numbers and going quiet. Because the public sees a high price and assumes the job got easier. The people actually growing the crop know the price is only one side of the ledger. AHDB's estimate for the full economic cost of producing winter wheat for the 2026 harvest came in at $16.59 per hectare. That figure was up 3% year on year, with fertilizer again doing a lot of the damage as gas-linked input costs stayed painful through the buying window. Now take that cost and set it against a wheat price of $199.75 a ton. You do not need a degree in agronomy to see what happens next. Divide the cost by the price, and you get about 8.31 tons per hectare. That is the break-even point. Not profit, not expansion, not maybe this year we can finally replace the tractor. Just zero. And here is the part that should bother anyone who thinks farming automatically benefits when commodity prices rise. The average English wheat yield last season was around 7 tons per hectare. Good weather helped. Grain quality held up. The crop still missed break-even by more than a ton per hectare. That is why Clarkson's choice makes sense. Not emotionally, financially. Because on the same land, at the same time, the crop needed to clear 8.3 tons just to stand still, while the national average sat below 7. The field did not fail. The math did. If you farm, that is probably not shocking. If you do not, it should be. Most people never see how thin the margin is until a number like that gets dragged into daylight. And once you see it, it is hard to unsee. On Clarkson's scale, 200 acres is just under 81 hectares. At $16.59 per hectare, putting that wheat in the ground would cost roughly £134,000 on a full economic basis. At 7 tons per hectare and $199.75 a ton, the crop would be worth about £113,000. That leaves a shortfall of around £21,000 at a near-record wheat price. In a normal yielding year, that is the ugly part. The market can look generous on paper and still fail the farm in practice. And if you push the price to the week's intraday high, the picture only improves on paper. The land still does not suddenly become a gold mine. It just loses slightly less money. That is the irony here. The best wheat price in years still was not enough to make 200 acres of decent English land pay its own way. So those empty acres were not wasted land. They were the most profitable acres on the farm, because they cost nothing. There is one important caveat here, and it matters. AHDB's 1659 figure is a full economic cost. It includes rent or land value, labor, and machinery capital. Strip those out and the picture changes, because plenty of farms run on variable cost logic and make decisions that way. That is fair enough. That is how a lot of farmers survive. But full cost is the more honest test, because it asks the real question. Not, did I cover the seed bill? But, is this land actually earning its keep? On that test, even high wheat prices still leave a lot of English arable land struggling. And this is where Clarkson's comment stops being just about Clarkson. Because the celebrity part is the easy part to laugh at. The deeper point is who gets to decide what British farmland is for, and how many of those decisions are now being made by people who have never had to make one themselves. Clarkson's criticism of the new government was blunt. He pointed out that the people shaping farming policy are not farmers, and in many cases have never run a business at all. You can laugh at the line, but the underlying point is serious. If you are setting the rules for an industry, and you have never been inside the economics of that industry, you are usually slower to notice when the economics have already turned. That is a problem farmers have been shouting about for years. The rest of the country mostly hears it when a famous man says it into a national newspaper column. And that tells you something uncomfortable about British agriculture. Sometimes the truth only gets attention when it becomes slightly entertaining. Clarkson's own position makes the argument harder to dismiss, not easier. He is not some struggling smallholder doing all of this from a spare bedroom and a prayer. He has a television brand, a farm shop, a pub, a brewery, and a steady stream of visitors. He has ways to make money that most farmers do not. And yet even with all of that, 200 acres of arable land were still not worth planting. That is not proof that farmers are fine. It is proof that the strongest version of the farm is still under pressure. Most people would look at a farm like Diddley Squat and assume the celebrity machine cushions everything. The truth is the opposite. The celebrity machine is what cushions the farm from the full force of the numbers. If the best resourced version of the business is struggling to justify wheat, what do you think the quieter farms are doing? That question is the one that matters. Because once land stops paying to grow food, it does not sit there politely waiting for the economy to improve. It gets repurposed. First comes the lease to a bigger operator, then the contract crop, then the solar proposal, then the energy use, then the data center conversation that sounds ridiculous until it is not. No one has to vote to change the landscape. It happens field by field, when the spreadsheet says food is the weak option. That is the real warning in Clarkson's empty acres. Not that he had a bad year. It is that the most rational use of some English farmland may be drifting away from food entirely. And once that shift starts, it does not announce itself with a speech. It shows up in a field that was supposed to be wheat. There is also something else worth saying, because it makes this story more human and less abstract. Clarkson recently spoke publicly about his prostate cancer diagnosis, said it was caught early, and later confirmed that treatment had left no sign of the disease. That means this is not a man sitting around playing farmer for the cameras. He has been dealing with serious personal pressure while still running a business that has become part farm, part media company, and part public experiment. That matters because the 200 empty acres are not just a policy point. They are a sign of how the whole operation is evolving. Diddley Squat has spent years diversifying into everything except pure arable farming. The farm shop, the pub, the brewery, the television attention, the tourism, all of it has become part of the business model. Now the arable side itself is shrinking in public view because the numbers no longer justify the risk. That is the bluntest signal yet of where British farming is heading. Not failure, recalibration. And for a lot of farmers watching this, that will feel painfully familiar. You do not always quit because you have lost. Sometimes you quit the crop because the crop has already lost on paper. That is the line that should stay with people. Not, Clarkson left 200 acres empty. This, empty land can be the smartest land on the farm. And if that sounds absurd, that is only because the economics are harsher than the headline. So here is the question I want you to answer. If you farm, what does your own winter wheat cost per hectare this year, once you count the real numbers? If you do not farm, what does it tell you about British food when doing nothing can be the best business decision on 200 acres? Drop your answer in the comments. I want the honest version, not the polished one. Thank you for watching and subscribe.